Hi, folks. So I wanted to kind of collaborate on this and think about, is CBD the newest anti-inflammatory medication? Which is why I put you and me on this. You guys did contribute to our thoughts about this, and I appreciate so much of your awesome input during this really challenging time. So let's get started. I'm going to have a few short videos in place of like one long lecture when thinking about CBD and anti-inflammatories, because if you think about it too, this is how I've done it in our face-to-face classes. So just as a summary, I really liked this quote from Dr. Clark. The evidence has not caught up to the story that's in the public. And I think a lot of what you guys showed by bringing out those different articles really made sense. So we'll see some really great examples of that. The other thing to keep in mind is the second point here, that in Canada, pharmaceutical companies are sponsoring clinical trials to test CBD products in people. Now, we know that clinical trials can be timely, they can be very costly. So having a company sponsor is one way to mitigate those costs. But like some of you mentioned before, it can be problematic if we think about some of the bias that might be part of that. All right, so thank you for bringing that up. It's a good point. So what about the potential therapeutics? So I went through all of your posts in the discussion forum, and essentially I made a word cloud based on what the most common diseases were that it was touted to treat. So we have anxiety and seizures, arthritis, cancer tended to be the big ones up there. You can see COVID is in there too. I'll bring up that post in a little bit. But in terms of the efficacy of what's going on, a lot of you guys had some really good commentary when thinking about, okay, how much do I believe this work and what kind of parameters am I using to evaluate this work? So, for example, one of the points here, do you believe the evidence? So there might be a hint of truth, but I feel that scientists are being persuaded to publish anything that seems positive about CBD. Now, I wouldn't say that they're being persuaded to publish necessarily, but I would say that it's probably easier or more interesting, quote unquote, to publish stuff about CBD right now because it's very timely, right? Now, the other point here, if we're talking about anxiety, that was brought up by one of you guys in the discussion posts, there is some evidence that CBD can help with different forms of anxiety, but people should not self-medicate and should consult a physician before using CBD. Absolutely. I think one of the problems with a lot of these so-called natural medications that people use, and CBD being one of them, is that you don't necessarily think about some of the interactions. People assume that just because it's natural, therefore it's not harmful. So I really like this suggestion here is that, yeah, obviously, even though CBD is legalized, or the legality of it is kind of cloudy right now, that doesn't mean that you should just use it wantonly. Now, the other thing that I thought was really interesting too is here in this article, a student was talking about CBD as an anticonvulsant, or for somebody who might be suffering from various forms of epilepsy. All right. If they were going to prescribe it, one thing that they thought is that we should really figure out how this works and whether or not there is some kind of drug-drug interactions going on as well, right? Again, a lot of promising research, but this isn't conclusive by any means. So I liked that critical thinking here. Now, this post I really liked because somebody went through and kind of critically broke apart the various aspects of what the problems were with this particular article they were looking at. Okay, so the research was sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, so there could have been some bias, absolutely. We hope that there isn't, but we know that could definitely be some reporter bias in that. The trial, the length of time that they talked about, makes a lot of sense here in that they're saying essentially it was only 2 weeks, right? We don't know what the long-term effects could be. The sample size was small. Yeah, 150 patients isn't that great. And it might be interesting to see how representative the participants are of the population, right? One thing I've talked about before, I think with you guys, is table 1. And in a table 1, you're basically looking at the people who received the treatment and those who didn't receive the treatment, and how close do those people match on baseline measures. And in a reasonable table 1, they should be really close, right? You don't want your treatment group to be much different from the control group, right? You want to see those baseline parameters to be relatively the same. Now, this article is looking at with COVID, and I really liked the summary here. I do not agree with these CBD companies. CBD overall has anti-inflammatory effects, such as through reductions in release and production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and thus would reduce immune responses. Therefore, if CBD were to have an effect, it likely would be contrary to the prevention and increased immune response you would want to prevent and fight coronavirus. Absolutely. I think one of the challenges with coronavirus, it seems that there's a really big reaction from the immune system with this. So I think actually teasing out what will and won't be helpful when it comes to treating coronavirus is going to be a really big question in the scientific field in the next few years and weeks. But I would agree with this overall kind of general first glance look at this. Now, this particular paper, when we were looking at, or this post, I should say, talking about CBD and cancer, I thought this one was really interesting because they made some very defined claims and didn't back it up. And that's what the original poster in the forum was saying. So the article states that CBS oil can have 4 main properties: anti-proliferative, anti-angiogenic, anti-metastatic, and apoptotic, right? And essentially, what this is doing is this is a really good example of pseudoscience, in that they were talking about some scientific language in there, right? You can see apoptotic. Then essentially what they're saying too is they are using kind of, like anecdotal evidence that this works. So it says here, the article lists a bunch of people who claim to have been cured by CBD oil. That's not evidence, right? So essentially, this is one of those really problematic articles for me anyways, and I appreciate whomever it was that brought this up into the forum. So essentially what they were looking at is they were saying, they are using some scientific language. They state, if you look at the statement, basically 2/3 of the way down the page, they state that cannabis oil taken in large amounts will flood the blood. What does that even mean, right? This is where kind of our critical eye needs to come in when thinking about CBD as a potential anti-inflammatory. So overall, the big picture, a lot of, I thought this forum post summed it up well here. It seems that a common theme with many of these CBD treatments is that there could be several drug interactions. The potential negative outcomes do not outweigh the potential benefits that could come from it. Although CBDs do show great potential for treatments, as of now, they should be used with caution, right? We know that they have a pretty good safety profile, but again, this isn't something that you just want to be taking in massive doses because we don't know, right? So do we have any CBD-based drugs approved in Canada? So the one article that I showed you talked about those that are THC/CBD, so they have aspects of cannabis in it, but this is not solely cannabis. So Nabilone for treating nausea, so some of you guys mentioned nausea in the forums, and Sativex for multiple sclerosis to combat some of the pain and other side effects associated with multiple sclerosis. In the US, there is one that is approved for treating different types of epilepsy, but we don't have that currently available in Canada. Now, I'm not sure why, but that's something that we can look into. So this is kind of the state of where we're at in terms of what does CBD do, or what does it claim to do. So in the next little video I'm going to show you, we're going to talk about how could this work, and in the final little video we're going to talk about, is the evidence good to look at this, actually looking at the scientific evidence itself.